Today is Monday, August 25th, 2014. Mike Brown's funeral was held today in St. Louis. I remember crying uncontrollably on April 4th, 1968. That was the day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Now, I wasn't crying because I was extra sensitive to his mission or because I knew he was like a world-famous leader. I couldn't stop sniffling because the police in riot gear were tossing tear gas canisters on West 22nd Street in Indianapolis when I was 5 years old. I just remember screaming like, "It's burning! It's burning!" Of course, I had no idea why American cities like Chicago and Kansas City and Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Detroit, and others were simultaneously smoldering in the flames of seething anger, self-destruction, and hopeless rage. By the way, Dr. King's son, Martin Luther King III, he was sitting on the front row today at the funeral, right next to the family of Mike Brown. And that's the young man who was shot by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Before he died, his family and friends say that young Mike Brown gave his life over to Christ. But he was still a teenager. So he was just now beginning the process of maturing into the man he was not allowed to become. Dr. King had a dream. So did Mike Brown, we learned today. Dr. King dreamed of the day when he was, when as a people we would get to the promised land. Mike Brown had recent dreams of bloody sheets and death, and that the whole world would know his name. Unfortunately, Mike Brown's dream came true before Dr. King's did. And whenever I would hear his iconic words, "Let freedom ring from every village and every hamlet," I used to ask people, what is a hamlet? Ferguson, Missouri qualifies as a hamlet because it's like a side section suburb of St. Louis. And once again, little children have become innocent victims because schools were closed in Ferguson as a result of local violence. Quick, exactly what did you just visualize? Did you picture an angry African-American mob or protesters and looters? Or did you imagine blue waves of police officers terrorizing a small Missouri town for several generations and now wearing gas masks while marching behind army tanks? In the 60s, the media called it an insurrection by hoodlums. But recent violence by what hoodlums? Exactly. See, a city smack dab in the middle of the heartland of the USA, next door to our archway to the west, is under siege. Ferguson, Missouri is on fire in a good way because it's the brave and fed up young people who have taken charge of the protest, just like in the 60s. And it's on fire because the flames of mutual distrust continue to sizzle and divide the community. Ferguson is under siege because another unarmed young black male was riddled with bullets from a smoking gun of an authority figure previously sworn to protect and serve. Now, 1 week later, in the same Missouri city, another young black male was gunned down with automatic weapons for wielding a knife and 2 cans of soda. That's why tasers were invented, right? To make matters worse, the young man who was bleeding profusely because he was full of police bullets was flipped over and handcuffed. Most people assume that part of the standard police training is supposed to include how to defuse and de-escalate a hostile situation, right? To make matters even more worse, the public is well aware of the juxtaposition of fates, that if the loud suspect begging police to shoot him was white, now non-lethal negotiation tactics would most likely have been employed. A white mass murderer in a movie theater in Colorado was apprehended and not shot. Timothy McVeigh, he bombed a federal building in Oklahoma and killed 168 people, including children, while injuring over 680 others, damaging 324 other buildings within a 16-block radius, while simultaneously destroying or burning 86 cars and shattering glass in 258 buildings. And he was also apprehended, then quietly executed years later. Now, it seems to me that grown black folks who act like disrespectful children in the eyes of Ferguson police by talking back or mouthing off like a man or a citizen who knows their rights, but that gets them shot, then ask questions later, or gets them handcuffed after the fact in Ferguson. Is black life more expendable and less valuable than other races? Ferguson, Missouri has been under siege for a long time. 2013 statistics and data and facts show that 92% of all searches and 93% of all arrests were of African Americans. That's not liberal media, that's facts. Actor Hill Harper tweeted that it's a very definition of racial profiling and institutionalized prejudice. In my opinion, Ferguson is just one of the side effects and consequences of gentrification. We first heard that in like Boys in the Hood. Hip-hop artist Vic Damone, who is also from the St. Louis area, was recently quoted as saying, Ferguson used to be a white suburb, but now they're just mad because it's a black neighborhood now. But the cops are still white. See, that's his quote. Middle and upper class whites in all major U.S. cities are relocating and returning back near downtown areas as minorities are taking over suburbs which were once predominantly white, while the local police makeup and their mentality stays the same. Well, here in this country where we live, America has always been a series of communities in transition. The same thing happens in local schools all the time when the population of the pupils change faster than the complexion of the teachers or the educational professionals. Now, if you don't believe me, the next time a couple of African Americans move into a previous all-white subdivision, watch all the for sale signs that pop up. This has been a predictable, recurring pattern for generations, from coast to coast. Yet we're told that not all white people think alike. I know that's true for a fact. They don't. But when African Americans keep being told that we are living in post-racial America, it just makes some of us who have our eyes wide open, we just listen to that and go, whatever, dude. Missouri's governor called in the National Guard because Ferguson's local police are perceived as an occupying force, I guess, operating under a conflict of interest and as the guilty cover-up conspirators and insensitive perpetrators in the shooting case of a college-bound citizen. Others vehemently and hatefully refer to him as a common thug. Therein lies the unresolved racial ember still burning under the feet of America, scorching our willingness to be totally truthful about white privilege versus minority stereotypes, which makes them eligible to be shot dead like mangy dogs in the street. Now, your friends, family, talk radio personalities, and the general public immediately choose sides based on flimsy facts, bigoted and biased prejudices, personal experiences, and blind lockstep political allegiances. People will undoubtedly accuse me of race baiting by merely mentioning the opposite ethnicities of two men who had a rough tussle with one another, and officer saying now that he has a dislocated eye socket. That's like blaming the sun for shining light on places that were previously dark all night. Some subjects cause melanoma of the memory when skin color is involved because it rubs people of all shades the wrong way when American history, class warfare, crime data, educational disparities, straight up ignorance, and the detrimental influence of pop culture pops up each time a kid gets killed. Now, somebody is going to prefer that those uncomfortable facts be omitted from this dialogue. Trust me. Have you heard me say the word murder? No. Have you heard me say the phrase callous slaying? No, you have not. When civil rights leaders like Minister Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton show up on the scene, they are like they are right now, and they have been in Ferguson since the protest first began. Then extreme conservative pundits start yelling things like, oh, brother, of course, there they are again, as loudly and as lasciviously as they can. Now, spreading their impatient vitriol from their worldwide media platforms. And you know, they got them. They love to cringe about those two leaders in particular. I'm talking about Sharpton and Jackson, because they assert that Sharpton and Jackson magically appear when the bright lights of national cameras are focused in their direction. And let me say, just for the record, to Reverend Al Sharpton directly, sir, I appreciate your eloquent and carefully chosen words of comfort today, your words of healing and calls for justice today, as the ears of the nation were tuned in to see how you would eulogize a young man that some in this country are on a campaign to demonize by talking about cigars and marijuana. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. Here's a question for everyone else. Have you ever met a teenager? I have, and I bet that the holier than thou, self-righteous among us have too. maybe right in your own living rooms. See, political adversaries can be blind to the fact or lose sight of the mission as to who is truly to blame when a building is burning down to the ground. Let's put the fire out first. People tend to have a personal stake in protecting their own interests and the extreme viewpoints of their base supporters. Mike Brown no longer gives a flip. See, some folks might speculate that media cannibals continue to carve a name for themselves from his unburied carcass. Well, it's buried now. But it doesn't matter because protesters are remembering and honoring Mike Brown by speaking up in his behalf. Jewish doctors, Jewish lawyers, professors, business owners, leaders, art collectors, and other affluent Jews in Germany during the rise of Nazism remained silent, as only the poor Jews were systematically rounded up for extermination. Now, when it was their turn to be targeted and sent to death camps, there was no one to help them. Israel's worldwide motto is now never forget Simon Wiesenthal's the Holocaust Museum. This is why decent citizens from coast to coast are uniting in outrage because of Brown's death. Minorities realize that they or their loved ones could be next. Mike Brown's character was also assassinated when he was caricatured as a petty cigar thief, even as the bullets were still being pulled from his soon-to-be buried body. Today is August 25th, 2014, so it's not soon. He's buried. Both sides view bloodshed much differently. Some say it was self-defense and justifiable homicide, while others maintain it is completely unethical and beyond disrespectful. How the value of black youth continues to be diminished by the fact that no one is hardly ever disciplined for the disappearance of black males from the community, be it mass incarceration or sudden death due to drug skirmishes, felony records, and gang violence. Exactly what gang did you just visualize? What color were they wearing? Dr. Michelle Alexander speaks eloquently, passionately, and extensively on false imprisonment and mass incarceration issues, and you should look her up sometimes. Dr. Michelle Alexander. A teenager was killed. Let's start there. How and why was he even approached is the million-dollar question. Protesters believe Officer Darren Wilson had no prior knowledge of a misdemeanor cigar heist before his confrontation with the big brown boy, no pun intended. Apparently, that offense qualifies as an automatic death sentence for a black male in Ferguson. A lady friend of the secluded officer claims he heard about it over his police radio prior to confronting Brown, but she didn't mention anything about a broken eye socket. Here's a question. If, in fact, the store owner made a 911 call to police to report a strong-arm robbery, then don't you believe that 911 recording will be played in a continuous loop over and over again on Fox TV and other media outlets all over America? At least 5 eyewitnesses contradicted Officer Wilson's lady friend and her portrayal of his self-defense story. A young man walking with Brown says Officer Wilson rolled down his window and yelled for them to get the F off the sidewalk. Next, the eyewitnesses stated that Officer Wilson backed up his car and tried to open up the door, but it ricocheted against Brown and slammed back shut. According to eyewitnesses, Officer Wilson tried to drag Mike Brown inside his car window. When Brown resisted by running away, he was shot. Eyewitness accounts state that he quickly surrendered by saying, okay. You see my son? Then turned toward Officer Wilson and knelt down. Now, according to each separate eyewitness, that's when Officer Wilson jumped out of his car and continued to shoot more bullets into the already kneeling Brown, who fell face first to the pavement where he died. Mike Brown was shot 6 times. The fatal bullet, fired down into the top of tall Mike Brown's head, was the deadly force that tragically ended his young life. However, it has not yet been explained why his lifeless body was allowed to lay in the blazing hot sun for 4 hours. Now, would police have allowed a white shooting victim to lay on the concrete for 4.5 hours? Would it have taken almost 2 hours for detectives to arrive on the deadly scene to gather crucial evidence? The seemingly senseless slaying of an unarmed teenager plainly illustrates what provokes the wrath of millions of people around the world. Because no one has been indicted nor arrested. and there has been no loss of employment, nor has the triggerman lost one penny of his income. As a matter of fact, a website supporting Officer Wilson has already received more than like 50,000 likes. A crowdfunding effort is also underway to pay for Officer Wilson's legal defense and living expenses as the country awaits the grand jury's decision. We're a long way from this thing even being over. Heightened and ignited emotions in those who empathize with the victim, Mike Brown, often fail to acknowledge that in our American criminal justice system, each person is guaranteed the right to due process. And this goes for Officer Darren Wilson, as due process should have been extended for the deceased, young Mike Brown. A rush to public judgment undermines this constitutional process, especially when the destructive tactics of street justice, revenge, and knee-jerk retaliation are employed. Peaceful resolutions cannot occur if otherwise rational people are too hurt and too furious to listen to each other articulate their apprehensions as well as their hopes for a better tomorrow. And news agencies packing up, leaving town because they think, well, the story's over. Well, outside agitators, I'm going to bring that up. Remember the movie Mississippi Burning? Now, that was the repeated phrase used by locals to negatively describe federal investigators as well as both black and white civil rights workers who were killed for just trying to get black folks to register to vote. Now, we've all seen the similarities on TV and online between the images of the 50s and the 60s and side-by-side photo comparisons with current Ferguson pics. So let me ask you, is there really such a thing as colorblind curiosity? Ferguson, Missouri is a metaphor for abandoned urban America. If 10 young black men are standing in a group, but one of them is not wearing a shirt, which one of the young men are TV reporters and their camera crews most likely to gravitate toward? So is Lil Wayne to blame for like young males of all colors? I'm talking about all colors, wearing their pants below their waist, labeling them as lazy and making them instant targets for police harassment? So you can ask best-selling author Tim Wise about that. Love Tim Wise. He wrote White Like Me. He's my favorite expert on that topic. Many people may also ask, why do people riot? Well, people riot for a number of reasons. Some teams riot, people riot because their hockey game loses the championship or their soccer team loses the championship. Others take their frustrations to the streets to express their outrage with a system of oppression and senseless acts of desperation, like one massive group. Marvin Gaye saying, makes me want to holler. The great orator Erik Dyson, he wrote about that. Much love, Erik Dyson. Most minorities are convinced that if George Zimmerman got away with the cold-blooded murder of Trayvon Martin, then surely Officer Wilson will be exonerated and excused for emptying his pistol into an unarmed black teenager. Some believe that he either should not or will not even be arrested nor face trial for killing Brown, because when people have predetermined beliefs about the double standards deeply rooted in the justice system, they no longer care what authority figures have to say anymore. They also cease to care about fitting into that kind of future. Sadly, they then become willing to die in exchange for a few seconds of being heard or maybe even being respected. In doing so, they further perpetuate and accentuate the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And those who believe they have no hope at all. Not even Tyler Perry can write a 24-hour made-for-TV reality show like the real-life drama and the sad saga that's unfolding right now in Ferguson, Missouri. Things could get much worse if a Ferguson grand jury actually has the nerve to indict Officer Wilson. But then local prosecutors do not disqualify nor recuse themselves if they also happen to play golf with Officer Wilson on the weekends. It could also get worse because drug dealers do not want someone like dedicated Houston community organizer Deloyd Parker in Ferguson, Missouri, because he will only prevent their profits from stacking up. And private prison corporations do not want new breed visionaries like Reverend Jamal Bryant of Baltimore and Ferguson either, for the very same reason. Minority prisoners are profitable cash cows in the totally legal human trafficking business called the private prison system or corporations. Investors on Wall Street are directly impacted by the stability of this billion-dollar growth industry. And here's another important question, by the way. Is there a small handful of judges who are paid illegal and scandalous kickbacks by private prison firms to single-handedly provide them with a fresh stream of underprivileged and incompetently represented clients by saddling them with longer sentences for minor infractions of the law. Yes, Google it. Khalil Gibran, he mused about crime and punishment in his timeless book, The Prophet, when he wrote, "You cannot separate the just from the unjust and the good from the wicked, for they stand together before the face of the sun, even as the black thread and the white thread are woven together. And when the black thread breaks, the weaver shall look into the whole cloth, and he shall examine the loom also." Now, Gibran's malfunctioning loom metaphor suggests that the system and the society are equally accountable for the misdeeds of the lawless, because in the fabric and fairness and like-mindedness, we coexist together in a vacuum of hypocrisy and contradiction. Let me start over. If that was too poetically cerebral to comprehend, then perhaps Malcolm X may be more suitable to your liking. He bluntly stated, "Free your behind, your mind will catch up later." So here's the bottom line. Business leaders must be inspired to continue investing in public schools, as well as the Ferguson, Florissant Valley communities of St. Louis. I had a chance to lecture at Flo Valley Community College. Local police must refocus their attention to preserving the property of small business owners. And since the Black Lawyers Association, aka the New Black Panthers, are in town, they need to keep infiltrating and shutting down the foolishness of pretend protesters, especially those from other cities who wish to disrupt the peace process by keeping hot ghetto mess going by destroying buildings and aggravating law enforcement officials by firing shots into the crowd to instigate and accelerate the onslaught of more confusion. And police are also a huge instigator in this case. By the way, they continue to call peaceful protesters animals. That's on video, while cursing them out under their breath or directly to their face, as Talib Kweli, when his arguments with Don Lemon on CNN. I believe the majority of police officers in America are law-abiding citizens. If a racist few are easily agitated and feel threatened by slow-walking people carrying signs while looking them directly in the eyes, while speaking their minds very forcefully to their face, well, then let the peacemakers who are there speak up and remind everyone that we are an American family still evolving and trying to become a harmonious collection of imperfect humans. Both sides must strive to build bridges of consistent credibility to construct new arches of trust in the city of St. Louis. Serious leaders, I'm talking about serious leaders of all ethnicities and political persuasions, the white, Latino, Jewish, Asian, Arab, and especially black leaders. We must form a united coalition. Next, the other leaders who are nearby must support them and help to hold up their arms, much like Aaron did for Moses, to encourage we the people in order for us to form a more perfect union. That kept the people encouraged. Fellow servant leaders must be willing to walk arm in arm in the streets to show our nation what true solidarity actually looks like. Now, I'm going to say this. The real enemies of America are, okay, 1, apathy, which some call just plain old selfishness. 2, being comfortable with being mediocre. 3, a lack of commitment to roll up our collective sleeves and work to be producers as opposed to always being broke consumers. And 4, reckless attempts to polarize the people, especially by the media and by the brutal pre-martial law type of policing that is currently getting out of control in this whole country, not just in Ferguson. These destructive cancers to the community must be metastasized in Missouri, minimized, and wherever economic and racial disparities persist. And the people should not be made to feel like hostages held at gunpoint by the police, afraid to cross the street into a better reality. Let me just say it like that. Just because both parties feel intimidated by the other one. Ferguson needs to implement bold education initiatives to provide entrepreneurship efforts and job training. They also need equal representation on school boards and city council seats. Accomplishing these things alone will at least reinvigorate the process, don't you think, of drying up and dissipating the school to prison pipeline in Missouri and around the whole nation, which should top everyone's public and personal agendas. Our President Barack Obama, eloquently addressed the Ferguson debacle by stating, "There is no excuse for excessive force." Well, the Brown family is grieving the loss of their son. Was that excessive force? We must not allow them to feel abandoned nor to feel isolated or alone. As a country, let us join together to be that better way. Let us at least try to be our brother's keeper, as our president has implored us to be. And it's difficult to imagine how hostile, hardcore Republicans who still resent the fact that Obama is their president, why they would even object or stand in the way of improving the human condition, even though they are opposed to everything President Obama says and does. Some say that they are borderline treasonous in their commitment to sabotage his tenure as a world leader and as our president. Yet, where there's a stubborn will, there is a self-righteous way, and you know that. As Rodney King, yet another victim of police brutality, he once stated, "Can we all just what? Just get along?" Unfortunately, some folks would be the first in line to light the final match that explodes the rumbling powder keg that is Ferguson. Hint, hint. They are the same hate-filled folks who are now saying, "Just drop a bomb on Ferguson and be done with them already." You know, you heard people say that. They are easy to identify because they are the folks whose actions show that they don't want America to be healed or unified. Pain begets pain until it knows a better way. As a country, let us join together to be that better way. Ron Karinga, Kwanzaa. Kujichagulia is that self-determination. The disenfranchised and much maligned among us must accept responsibility for their own future. People must respect themselves before they can expect anyone else to see them as valuable contributors to society. Caucasians continue to benefit from a 400-year head start of institutionalized advantages and the lavish, lingering vestiges of slavery, while darker populations conditioned by self-mutilating generational mentalities of abject poverty continue to suffer from slavery's long-reaching, worthless shadow, which some swear was cast upon the motionless body of Mike Brown, as authority figures obviously felt that the zero-sum total of his value to society was so negligible and unworthy of dignity that his final 4 hours on earth might as well be spent laying face down on the hard pavement of Ferguson, like everyday roadkill, which often gets scooped up much faster. But 18th century slavery is not a valid excuse for 2014 self-inflicted harm and an allergic reaction to wearing t-shirts and pulling one's pants up. See, those young men, as far as some callous Caucasians and people who quote Bill Cosby's book out of context are concerned, those young men might as well put unemployable red bullseyes on their back and be run over by the war tanks now parked in Ferguson, poised to flatten them because they do not fit in with the fairy tale future of white picket fences of pale Pleasantville and our town, USA. Mike Brown should not have been killed. Law enforcement officers of all colors should adhere to valuable lessons learned in cultural sensitivity training classes. Olive branches must be passed back and forth between the people and the police, as opposed to trading bullets and the militarization of local offices. The National Guard should never be called in except for like natural disasters, chemical or biological disasters. Okay, what about war? Ferguson is an avoidable disaster in the making. If Officer Wilson does not address the public soon and express remorse and or regret for protecting himself or for being temporarily insane for slaughtering his younger brother in the street, then tensions will dramatically increase. I'm telling you, in spite of his peaceful funeral today. The foundation of future friendships and potentially peaceful coexistence will rapidly disintegrate and deteriorate as bridges of brotherhood will be burned and then corroded with the rust of distrust. Thousands of Officer Wilson badge t-shirts will be sold to mostly white people while the KKK raises funds from coast to coast to defend him. African Americans will feel more compelled than ever to arm themselves with deadly weapons in self-defense against the Ku Klux Klan and those with guns in positions of authority who are predisposed as predators obsessed with making brown people obsolete, no pun intended, to the family of Mike Brown, and professionally trained and instinctively inclined to hunt them down during routine traffic stops, only to suspect them of being guilty until proven innocent. I have my own stories on that. Wait till my book comes out. Instead of simply seeking to serve and protect them, minorities will learn to use their cell phones like black boxes after an airplane crash, recording and documenting the truth, then storing it up in the cloud in the event of a shooting or an entire community collapse. But will it do any good if judges and prosecutors robotically align themselves with the police they must work in conjunction with every single day? Meanwhile, national civic leaders will resort to flying back home to write more dynamic speeches for the next racial calamity. Here's the question: where do we go from here? Ferguson, Missouri is in the glaring national spotlight for a reason. People around the world are posting pics of themselves and their groups in the hands up, don't shoot position or that pose. Minorities see themselves or their loved ones planked in the street where Mike Brown lay for 4 hours. Black parents give their teenage drivers the speech. I gave it to mine for a legitimate reason. The one about being stopped and pulled over by the cops. Hands on the wheel, no sudden moves, shut your mouth. Just say, yes, sir, no, ma'am. Reach slowly for your license. Keep your hands in sight. Get your insurance out. Better yet, have it ready before they get there. Therefore, do blacks and Latinos feel paranoid or protected when they see the police? If they are accustomed to police cars making U-turns in the middle of the street when they see 4 males riding 4 deep, that means 4 of them in the car, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, or walking suspiciously on a sidewalk, they already know the answer to that question, don't you? Be truthful. Ferguson, Missouri is an uncomfortable mirror our country is now being forced to gaze into on a nightly basis unless we choose to bury our heads in the sand, cover our ears, and whistle extra loudly to keep from seeing and hearing the ugly reflection we see looking back at us on social media and 24-hour news stations. If you really desire to experience the raw, uncut, impolite, and unadulterated viewpoints of so-called post-racial America, I dare you right now to scroll down to the bottom of this YouTube video and read the comments related to the shooting of Mike Brown. That's where vile and vicious internet trolls breed. It attracts the anonymous maggots of maliciousness who resent being asked to be their brother's keeper. Sorry, President Obama. Keep trying, because they're going to talk about you the worst. They're going to say it's your fault Mike Brown got shot. Watch him. I believe we are better than that. I believe in our potential as a people. I believe God is always in control. Thank you, Dr. E. Dewey Smith, for that reminder. Positivity must prevail if we are to move forward with our heads held high, where our best intentions are activated and celebrated. As Americans, we are a community of achievers and big dreamers. I love white people. I love black people. I love anyone with red blood who has a heart that bleeds for peace and peaceful solutions to painful ordeals like this one. Tear gas will continue to make me cry, but I will know why this time. See, I'm a proud protester. I'm a loyal supporter of fair and honest law enforcement officers and our judicial system when the accused are given top-notch representation. I am a citizen of the United States of America, even when I disagree with the actions of some of my fellow citizens. Most of all, I am a truth seeker. I knew Mike Brown. I grew up with him. I went to school with that dude. He attended my family reunions. I ate at the same table with him. Mike Brown was my son. He was my father. Mike Brown was that old man sitting on the front porch. He was the teenager who right now does not believe he would get a chance to even taste the age of 20. He was my best friend. He was my worst enemy. He was my neighbor. Mike Brown was that college graduate. He was also that high school dropout. Mike Brown was the rich man. He was the poor man. He was the member of my church. He was my pastor. He was my principal with aspirations of becoming the superintendent. He was my mayor, my city councilman, my congressman, and my senator. He was my president. He represented my potential. Mike Brown was me. I am Mike Brown.